Our disability is our greatest strength. It gives us the supervision to see the issues facing humanity from a more inclusive perspective and the grit to fight back against all odds. Welcome to Super Adaptables, the More Than Walking Video podcast discussion. Welcome to Super Adaptables, the podcast where people of all abilities gather to discuss pressing issues that affect the disability community and their implications for the world at large. We're your hosts. I'm Corey Pheez, C4 complete quadriplegic since 2005.
And I'm Jonathan Sigworth, C7 complete quadriplegic since 2006, both of us hailing from the great state of Connecticut.
Yes, sir. And we are recording this on Thursday, the 17th of July, 2025. And in a little bit, we'll be discussing with our expert about food assistance, breaking bread with the expert.
Fantastic, Corey. Looking forward to it. And, today we'll kind of diving deeper into the details of benefits like SNAP, also covering other food assistance programs like women, infants, and children, national school lunch programs, etc., and really trying to understand how these programs are structured, where they get their funding from, kind of what are their limitations, and as well as, what are some of the underlying causes of poor nutrition and hunger in America. And of course, how does the so-called Big Beautiful Bill Act, which is now law, affect these programs in the short and long term? So super excited to have that conversation today, Corey.
Yes, sir. I'm definitely excited as well because this is the current topic that is affecting so many people in our community. Not just folks with disabilities, but low-income families as well. And everyone's trying to scramble to figure it all out. And today, as you said previously, we want to try to get some answers to these important questions. But today we have special guest joining us, Jenny Hirsch. Jenny is the Chief of Staff at Connecticut Food Share, the food bank serving the entire state of Connecticut. Jenny joined the organization over 7 years ago, and in that time has worked to develop the organization's leading trusted voice in policy and government relations. She was instrumental in executing the historic merger of Food Share and Connecticut Food Bank in 2021 in developing the new Connecticut Food Share organization. She is currently completing her master's Public Administration and Graduate Certificate in Nonprofit Management with the University of Connecticut School of Public Policy and is a 2024 HBJ 40 Under 40 awardee. Originally from New York, she now lives in Hartford with her partner and their dog. Welcome to the show, Jenny.
Hi, Corey. It's wonderful to meet you. Thank you both so much for having me on and for such a generous introduction.
Absolutely.
No, we're so pleased to have you on, Jenny. And just as a reminder to our listeners, Super Adaptables is made possible in part by a grant from the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation's National Paralysis Resource Center. The information provided and opinions expressed in these podcasts do not necessarily reflect the views of the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. For more information about the Foundation's National Paralysis Resource Center, visit www.christopherreeve.org. Also, the views expressed on this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of More Than Walking either, but belong to us as individual speakers.
Yes. So in 2024, the United States food sales totaled $2.63 trillion. Now, this figure includes food spent at both at-home meal preparation and on the road, according to the USDA's website. So theoretically, if we use that data, with data compiled in 2013, the average American spent $2,641 annually on food. If we were to divide that number by the 2024 data, that would cover food costs for approximately 995 million people for a year, which is triple the amount of people in the United States. Though the data from 2013 is outdated, it lends insight to potential food provision scenarios.
So contrast those findings with the 30 to 40% amount of food wasted, or 133 billion pounds and $161 billion worth of food in 2010, according to the USDA. It makes you question why food scarcity persists in a nation that represents great opulence and extravagant waste. We recognize that this information is one piece to a complex puzzle. However, there isn't much difficulty when it comes to quenching the feeling of hunger. Your body just needs a nutritious meal, a beverage of your choice, or possibly clean, potable water at an affordable price, preferably free. Yeah. So, there's a lot of figures we just mentioned there, but the general summary is like, in the world's wealthiest nation, why do we still have food deserts? Why do we still have issue of malnutrition and hunger? That's kind of what we want to get to the bottom of, through these conversations. And why do we keep cutting off the programs that are helping supposedly solve those problems?
Those are big questions. And I hope I can certainly touch on sort of the experience here in Connecticut, and feel free to dialogue about anything and spin off anything I'm saying. But, I think with regard to the question about food deserts and that situation, I think a big part of it is sort of economic activity and economic stimulus. And I think when you look at a program like SNAP, that makes up around 12% of the retail revenue for stores in Connecticut. If we're seeing revenue decline as SNAP benefits go down, that's less incentive for stores to expand or open or put themselves in areas with high SNAP participation. That's certainly one possible path you could see, and one reason why we maybe are where we are right now. I think there's also certainly important to consider the sort of food apartheid perspective that, a desert is an ecosystem that exists naturally, and an apartheid situation is something that's sort of manufactured in many ways, and something that we can solve for and look at and find solutions to. So I think there's opportunity to work really closely with sort of intersecting industries to bring retailers to different neighborhoods. We personally have worked in partnership with the federal government to secure funding to open a sliding scale grocery store in a neighborhood that previously did not have that resource. And we're sort of piloting that model to see if it can be replicated in other areas, run by local organizations, really driven by the local community. And so it's serving their need as they see it, without us sort of dictating what they may or may not need. It's really built based on what their needs are. And the goal being it can serve, community members who need that service of a sliding scale model where there's maybe less ability to pay the really exorbitant prices that groceries are today. Whereas others who have that ability to pay are perhaps paying at cost or slightly more. And you're really able to not only provide for everyone in the community, but also sort of inspire a sense of community buy-in towards just overall community health and well-being.
Yeah, that sounds so important. And the existence of food deserts definitely speak to a problem. Apart from the continuation of these SNAP programs. There's an issue where on every single corner you have fast food restaurant, you have fast food places and other corner stores that don't necessarily provide the same nutritional food options that you might get at a traditional grocery store. And addressing those economic pressures that make that the reality is really useful. But then also kind of thinking about the next step, what would it take in your mind to kind of solve the problem that could bring a permanent end to this issue of even needing programs like SNAP in the first place? What do you see as the underlying cause for this perpetual need for food assistance?
Yeah. that again, that's a huge question. There's a lot of layers to what a solution could look like, and I think you have to consider that the United States is like vast, and there's many sort of like solutions that would need to be implemented depending on where people are. I think you have to look at sort of rural hunger versus urban hunger, looking in suburban neighborhoods. There's very different approaches that might be needed, and I think we have to treat it with a bit of nuance. But I think at the end of the day, it's really persistent sort of economic inequity and lack of access to economic mobility that is at the root of all of this. This is, it's not for lack of folks wanting to move forward in employment and situations that are going to put them on a path to food security. I think we sometimes run into an issue where people are forced to choose between, their economic upward mobility and being able to keep the benefits that they need, because the delta between those two things is not enough to make up the difference. So if you make $1 more and that puts you in a place where you're no longer eligible for your benefits, that one additional dollar does not make up the difference of what you're losing from those benefits. So we're disincentivizing folks who really do want to move forward and not be on benefits anymore, but we're not looking at wage equity in a way that's going to get people to that place of stability. Looking further at just sort of enforcing job availability and job resources for people. Most of the people we're serving and most of the people who are accessing benefits are gainfully employed and sometimes working 2-3 jobs, and they're just not making enough to make ends meet. They might be in a situation where they have folks in their household who are unable to work, and these programs are very good at ensuring that people who are eligible are getting the benefits they need. The benefits are not exorbitant for the most part as it is, and I think we're going to see that continue to decline. So, making sure that the benefits are structured in such a way that the folks who are eligible for them have access to them, that they're appropriately funded, and that the program itself is structured so that people are not at risk of hitting that benefit cliff where they fall off and they're suddenly worse off than they were before. And finding a way to make it sort of having consideration for the fact that people are whole people, and there's a lot of circumstances that people are going to find themselves in, and we need to be encouraging sort of forward momentum for people, and also being considerate of the situations that people find themselves in. These are not easy programs to access. Government sort of has a lot of layers of protection, both for the program and the funding and the individuals on them. And if you've ever sat to fill out a form for a benefit program, and filled out the subsequent forms to maintain your eligibility for those programs, it's a lot of work.
I always encourage people, you've ever tried to fill out an SSI, SSDI form, you really need a lawyer. Because especially with programs like this that either provide insurance or supplemental income, like you make a mistake on the form and it gets rejected and then you have to reapply again. That's months and months and months of a benefit that you need to literally survive. And so, yeah. And
you may not know what the mistake you made was.
And so they probably will not tell you.
So it's incredibly complicated to go through. It's very burdensome. I think one thing, that I think would be a real improvement for everyone, both sort of government systems and for the people who are accessing these services and entitled to these services that can improve their well-being, is looking at things like qualified eligibility. So if you're sort of already enrolled in SNAP, you meet the eligibility requirement, or already enrolled in Medicaid, you meet the eligibility requirements for SNAP, you should be automatically enrolled. And we know that that's something that's going to ultimately improve your health outcomes. Folks who are on SNAP, who are also receiving sort of education around nutrition, have better health outcomes. So we're also working and talking to folks about how can we be doing research to document that sort of the tie together and the path forward, so we can show and demonstrate that this is beneficial to people, and it's also a cost savings down the line for the government, because you're improving health outcomes overall, people are having less insurance claims, and we're saving time and resources on duplicative application processes.
Yeah, I think, going to, how long it can take to fill out an application from the time you put pen to paper to the time you receive your benefits, I think there's a little bit of like PTSD within communities because
Mhm.
they're like, going to what you said about the fear of if I make too much, I can lose my benefits. But just because I make more doesn't mean that I'm making ends meet. And if I'm the only person that is able to work because maybe a family member has a disability or I'm trying to support my children, you can work 2 or 3 jobs. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to gain, you're so gainfully employed. And I think that's what creates the myth surrounding these benefits, that there's somebody lazy inside of a
Yeah.
basement somewhere and they're just collecting this government assistance, and this is how we're going to eliminate this waste, fraud, and abuse by cracking down on all of those individuals. Um, and not to get too far into that conversation, but within the Connecticut environment, what are some of the programs, outside of SNAP that you see people using and
or
taking advantage of?
or even with Snap. If we definitely want to cover the who do these programs cover, what do they provide, and what are the eligibility requirements generally speaking? If you can speak to those available in Connecticut versus nationally.
So I'll speak a little more to Connecticut because it is so different nationally. There's a certain
Sure.
amount of flexibility that states have in terms of how they manage the eligibility and the application process and all of that. So I can speak better to Connecticut, and if I can touch on national, I'll do my best to. I think one thing that's very progressive in Connecticut is that the state has taken it upon themselves. I think this was about 4 years ago, to expand the income eligibility threshold. So they opened that up by an additional, I believe, 10%, which meant that more people who did not meet the federal income threshold to access SNAP are able to get SNAP in Connecticut. And I want to really clarify why that's so important for Connecticut, because we're such a high cost of living state. Folks generally make a little bit more than the national average, right? Totally makes sense. It lines up. But because it's a federal income threshold to be eligible for SNAP, it means that there's a lot of folks who their day-to-day experience means they should be accessing these benefits. When all things equal, they should be eligible. So the state increased access to SNAP to help get those folks covered. And the state picks up the cost for that. They cover the benefit amount and they also cover the administration on that. So that's a really progressive thing that Connecticut did to get folks who are sort of just on that little kind of edge access to a benefit that can really make a big difference in the lives of them and their families. The sort of survival budget for a family in Connecticut is $118,000 a year. That's survival budget. That's not like we go to the movies every week and we do a ton of fun stuff all the time and have extra income to sort of have, quote unquote luxuries. This is just to survive. Most people are not making that income. And, we're in a situation where the income threshold for SNAP is so low that you have to be sort of in a very bad situation and really, really needing those benefits to qualify at the federal level. So the state did a really good thing in opening that up to allow more people onto the SNAP program.
Actually, a
yeah.
question with that figure before you continue. That survivor's income of the 180,000, does that consist of like a family of 3, family of 4, or just
I believe it's for a family of 4, and that's
Okay.
they call it the ALICE population, asset limited, income constrained, but employed. So those are folks who are working, they're employed, they have sometimes multiple jobs. And again, they're just sort of not able to make ends meet. And that's something that the United Way of Connecticut updates every year. They do a really incredible report sort of advocating on behalf of folks who don't generally have someone standing up and saying that this is a population that we need to make sure that we're covering services for.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And what is the federal national income limit?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. You know, off
Or
the top
just
of my
ballpark,
ballpark,
just to
I
visualize.
think it's 118% of the federal poverty level is what the income threshold is. They work on percentages. It's not always dollar
Right.
amounts. But I can certainly get you that we can include maybe in some notes afterwards. But I know there's a lot of nutrition programs out there. I'm happy to kind of touch on more of them beyond SNAP as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's any of you see our list. Any others that you want to touch on?
Well,
sorry. The federal average income threshold is not a single fixed number. Instead, it refers to the federal poverty level, which varies based on family size and geographic location. So for the 48 contiguous states and Washington, D.C., the 2025 FPL for a single person is $15,650, and it increases by $5,380 for each additional person in the household. I don't know if that answers the question.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, it is kind of a squishy process, right? There's a lot of things that go into it. I think also looking at like gross income limits, so what gets counted as part of your income. In some states, there's situations where I believe housing is counted as part of your income if you own the home. There's a lot of things that can affect, and that's something that happens, and you'll see it a lot with military families where they don't qualify for SNAP because their on-base housing is counted as part of their income. And then they're not eligible for SNAP, even though their formal income would put them in the eligible range.
Gotcha. A lot of math to go.
Yes, it is a lot of math. But I'll put shine a little bit of light on. I see down here you've got the TFAP program, which I cannot fully express how essential TFAP is to emergency food providers like us. So as a food bank, we operate largely on donated food. We work with retailers and really generous individuals and vendors all across the state to get donations that we then distribute at no cost. We work with a network of around 600 agency partners, and that's shelters, meal programs, food pantries in every town in Connecticut to help get that food out to folks, again, at no cost. TFAP helps to supplement what's available. If we were just distributing donated food, we could not cover the need. There's not enough donatable food out there to fill that gap. Right now we're looking at 1 in 7 individuals in Connecticut are food insecure, 1 in 6 children. That's a huge number. Since 2020, the sort of start of the pandemic, and just before that was the last time food insecurity went down in the state. Since then, it's gone up by 40%. So we're in a situation where the need is steadily continuing to grow. And a program like TFAP, which is a federal program, it's a commodity program. It provides us with food, large quantities of the same kind of food, which as a food bank is really important. The more we can get, mass quantities of product A out rather than, mass quantities of a mixed amount of stuff, the easier it is for us to distribute to people. So TFAP provides us with a lot of commodities, and it's all sourced in the US. So it's also a program that benefits the farming community because the USDA is buying those products from US farmers and US vendors who are processing the food. We, sort of earlier in the year when there was the first rounds of federal programming cuts, there were bonus loads allocated to the TFAP program, and we overnight lost 25 tractor trailer loads of food through that program that were allocated to us. We had ordered them, they were confirmed in the system, and they were canceled. So we lost around $2.7 million worth of food that we just we're not otherwise going to be able to make up the difference for. So the program is essential. It provides really good quality food that we can then turn around and distribute to people. So we're big fans of TFAP. TFAP's really important. And I see as well, we've got CSFP on here, which really provides that food for seniors. And we, as an organization, supplement what's in CSFP boxes. Those are all foods that are sort of reviewed by nutritionists to align with the sort of nutritional needs of seniors. So it's all food that's really good for folks, meets their dietary requirements. And we've taken it upon ourselves. We also distribute supplementary produce to go with the boxes. So we've added food on top of that go to those program recipients.
Are those commodity supplemental packages? Is that, correct me if I'm wrong, are these like the surpluses from different agricultural sectors that are then donated?
So they're not necessarily surpluses and they're not donated. So the federal government is the USDA purchases the food from the growers. It may be that food happens to be surplus, but it's all really good quality food. And it is heavily regulated. So it is well inspected for quality and care at every step of the process, including once it reaches us and gets out to folks. We continue to monitor it, and it's a heavily audited program. We get a lot of produce through that. We get truckloads and truckloads of produce through the TFAP program, which is incredible. If you come down here in the fall, you'll see truckloads of sweet potatoes guaranteed in our warehouse. And that's all from TFAP. So I can't say enough good things about the program and how important it is. And it's something I personally, in my role, spend a lot of time advocating on behalf of, because it makes a huge difference in what food banks are able to do for people.
And you said that, the food insecurity is now up 40% and is continuing to rise.
Yeah. Given
that we've come out of the pandemic, it's still kind of going on, but why does that food insecurity persist?
Yeah.
If we, other parts of society are kind of on the recovery side.
Yeah, I think we're seeing the sort of lingering and kind of persistent effects of a cost of living crisis. Wages are not on pace with where it costs to get your groceries and pay your rent and make your bills and all of the many things that go into a budget. And folks are sort of reaching the point where, they're needing to make choices each month with where their money is going, in a way that maybe they weren't before. And I think part of that, and the reason you see food insecurity, if people have to choose between medication and food, they have to choose medication. And you'll see often, people will go without eating in order to cover medication, or go, a parent going without eating to make sure that their child is eating. We don't want that to be the case. So we do everything we can to make sure that for those folks, there's food out there for them, and we can help to provide that. But I think you see food insecurity as sort of the marker of, a rising trend in general sort of instability in an area, because it's the first choice people can make. It's the one that they can go to and say, like, I'll skip a few meals, and that's really unfortunate. That shouldn't be the situation, but it is where we are right now.
We kind of covered that in our accessible and affordable housing podcast, where we talked about how the wages aren't, housing costs is going up 50%, but wages and income is not going up 50%. So it's the same thing when you're thinking about having to get to the grocery store. But, I like what you said, that there's no judgment. If you need food, there's food there for you. But, I'm thinking about this, and I don't know if the two have to do with each other. Maybe you can shed some light on it. But being that you kind of like operate as a mediator between, people not being able to get to the grocery store, get food to their table. But what happens when, a Connecticut food share like closes down? Because I know here in Bloomfield, I read that the CT food share was closing down. Is that being affected by the federal government? And how does that affect the residents in a given town if one of those hubs gets shut down?
Yeah. So I'm happy to touch on the situation briefly with our Bloomfield facility. So that's one of our buildings. It was one of our warehouses. It was actually the office I first started working in when I started working for Food Share. The decision to sort of sunset our operations at that building was made long before these sort of federal changes were happening. So that was a very strategic decision that was made in looking at the efficiency of our operations. The programs that we serve, we also don't distribute food directly to individuals out of our warehouse facilities. We work with community partners and food pantries and communities and social service agencies and all different types of really wonderful community-based organizations who are embedded in every community. They have those relationships. They're trusted voices in those communities. People feel really comfortable going to them, and we provide the food to them and they can then distribute it. So what the food bank does really well, and what our sort of primary purpose is to leverage our scale and logistical capacity to acquire and distribute mass quantities of food to community organizations. So we can kind of leverage our capacity to get a ton of food really efficiently stored and distributed. And those community organizations can then turn around and distribute it to the folks around them who need it. We have the ability to store, and if you ever want to come see one of our facilities, we're happy to have you. You can see the giant floor to ceiling freezers where we can store a ton of vegetables and things like that. But we also, we provide delivery. So the closure of the Bloomfield facility is not going to affect the availability of our food for programs in that area, because we are going to continue to provide for them and continue to deliver food to them and make the food available to them. It's actually going to help us to be more efficient, because we then are not sort of keeping a facility open and operating that's not being fully utilized, if that makes sense.
No, I understand.
And our mobile food pantries that I'm sure you see on the road are going to continue to be in the area at their regularly scheduled donation spots. Like we're continuing to have a presence in every area that we've had a presence. This just lets us be a little more effective and efficient.
So, when you talk about community partners, I notice like on a calendar, they'll have like distribution kind of dates where it'll be like a church and things like that. So that's okay. I understand.
Yeah. So the mobile food pantries are Connecticut Food Share programs that we run. We partner with folks who basically say, I have a parking lot and I have a bunch of people who want to volunteer. Can you bring your truck and distribute food? And we have 113 locations around the site around the state where we do that every other week. No questions asked, come get food. Beyond that, we have our sort of network of agency partners who are independent groups and nonprofits, and really wonderful, strong, diverse network of people who run organizations that we partner with and provide them with food and other resources. So we're not the boss of them. They are their own entities, but we work in partnership with them to get food out in the community as well.
And I mean, your nonprofit Connecticut Food Share is, of course, limited to Connecticut. Are there other nationally mandated nonprofits in every single state that function in the same role, or are there some states that don't necessarily have that central nonprofit entity orchestrating that process?
So in Connecticut, we are Feeding America is sort of like the national umbrella organization that sort of coordinates all of us as a network. There are many food banks who are not Feeding America food banks. We happen to be a Feeding America food bank. There are food banks in Connecticut that are not Feeding America food banks, who are doing really wonderful, incredible work. I can speak, to the scope of the Feeding America network. There are Feeding America food banks in all 50 states who are doing sort of the same scope of work that we do. Some states have more than one. Prior to our merger 4 years ago, there was Connecticut Food Bank and Food Share that served different territories within the state, but we were both Feeding America food banks. And we made the decision during the pandemic that the best thing we could do for Connecticut was to combine resources and merge as an entity to be sort of a stronger service provider. So now there is one Feeding America food bank in Connecticut, Connecticut Food Share.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on, the funding. You get some of the supplies from the TFAP program. Does Feeding America Network also get other federal or state funding, or is it primarily through private donations?
So we are largely funded by private donations. The people of Connecticut are incredibly generous and have made sure that we can do the work that we do. we have advocated with the state of Connecticut to increase funding to their program, the Connecticut Nutrition Assistance Program, which is a line in the budget that is dollars we can only spend on food sourced from Connecticut vendors and farmers. And that was a really strong advocacy partnership and coalition with our Connecticut farmers. To really help stabilize the ag industry and add additional revenue into that sector, because one thing we learned during the pandemic was the food system is very fragile. So we need a strong local food system to help weather those storms and help to sort of balance our local food economy. But those are dollars that we are able, because of our logistical capacity and our ability to source and distribute huge quantities of food, we can stretch those dollars very far. And that funding does not go towards salaries or gas for the trucks or anything to do with our operations. It's just dollars that pass through us, and we can stretch them very far to purchase a lot of food that goes back out into the community. So we do get some funding funding from the state, and it just goes into that CT-NAP nutrition assistance program. CSFP and TFAP are the two big federal programs that we sort of interact with. And obviously, we don't administer SNAP, but we do a lot of work around SNAP outreach to help get people signed up for the program and help them complete their very long application processes. Because for some folks, just having someone there to help walk you through the process can be a big difference between, getting it done and not. So we don't benefit directly from the SNAP program, but we certainly see an indirect benefit and also, an indirect negative effect when changes to the SNAP program happen. The more people who are on SNAP, the more people who are eligible for SNAP that are signed up for SNAP. I'll put it this way. There's a lot of people who qualify for SNAP who are not on the program for a number of reasons. The more people who qualify for the program and are successfully sort of rolled into the program and using those benefits and able to sort of like supplement their budget with that, the more we're able to help provide food for the folks who don't qualify for SNAP. If we see SNAP decrease benefit amounts or eligibility, we see our lines increase because folks have nowhere else to go. For many people, having, qualifying for SNAP and having those resources there for them is the difference between needing to go to a food pantry and not. We're serving largely a population of folks who either are on SNAP and their benefits just don't provide enough for what they need to get by. They need to supplement with food from a food pantry, or they're not eligible for SNAP and their only resource is a food pantry. SNAP, for every meal we provide, and this is a national statistic, for every meal that a food bank can provide, the SNAP program provides 9. It's an incredibly impactful program in terms of us being able to act as an emergency food provider and folks being able to gain that stability. So we see when, during the pandemic, there were supplemental benefits attached to SNAP. People were getting an additional benefit every month. That made a huge difference in people needing to access food pantries less. They were more stable. Their budgets were going further. They were able to shop and invest more money in their local economy. I think it's for every dollar of SNAP spent locally, it generates a $2.25 or $1.25. It generates additional local economic stimulus. Right. So it's a generative program.
As you mentioned, you reduce SNAP benefits, those local stores, and you're trying to get a grocery store in a food desert, and all of a sudden no one has the money to spend through SNAP. That's going to impact that business. And also it was interesting, we're constantly trying to combat this idea of the idea of dependency where I don't want a government handout, I can do this on my own. There's this American guilt that is false, because we've already paid for this. All of those years of working and paying into taxes are funding these programs. And what you're saying, like, the more people who are on these benefits, the more that those who really need it can benefit from the food pantries, I think is just a really important thing to highlight.
Yeah.
And the interdependency of how all these things work together along with the local economy and all of that.
Yeah, SNAP is not just a social program, it's an economic stimulus program. There's a lot of good that comes out of SNAP, not just the primary good and the good we should be most concerned about, which is people who need food are getting food. And I think one thing I personally and this organization will be working on in the coming years is making sure that people who are eligible for SNAP are signed up for it. Because there's a lot of folks, exactly as you said, who feel a sense of shame or there's a stigma attached to accessing these benefits that they are entitled to. SNAP is an entitlement program, and that means that if you are entitled to these benefits, they are there for you. If you meet the qualifications, if you do the paperwork, the benefit is there for you. And I think we need to start changing the conversation around, what it means to get support when you are entitled to it and when you need it, because it's not a permanent situation. It's a stabilizing, vehicle that can help get you to a place where you're no longer needing that support. You can move forward. It helps you get through a tough time. I think the more we can sort of destigmatize the experience of getting support, both food and otherwise, is something, we as a society will only benefit from.
I think that's, it's obviously harder to do than to say, right? One thing that I and John did at the beginning of doing this series was, and we do this with all series, is we always look at the history of how programs were developed. And then when you watch how or why they're developed, you see where the stigma comes into play. And so what we researched and found was in the late 1960s, then Senator Robert Kennedy and some others that went down to like the Mississippi Delta and saw the food scarcity that was going on. And then the following year, a documentary had aired about hunger in America. And if you haven't seen that documentary, you should definitely check it out. It's on YouTube. It's amazing. But what you found was, the same ongoing story between poor African Americans, poor Caucasian Americans, poor Hispanic Americans, and not being able to eat. And then people who are well off saying, well, look at all these people having kids, and I don't blame the kids, I blame their daddy. Right. And these are people in power. And so that narrative is fed over time into our mind, so that now it's just a blanketed statement to everybody. Because now when you see people who are, utilizing SNAP or formerly food stamps, you often see it's communities of color, it's communities of folks with disabilities. And it makes people think they're leaning just on the system and they don't want to get out when there isn't economic opportunity being presented, especially when we're talking about eliminating DEIA programs where that incentivizes a person to want to contribute to society. We know tons of people with disabilities who are going to school trying to get their bachelor's, people who are trying to go on to get their master's and their doctorate because they don't want to feel like they're leaning on the system, although the system was created for you to lean on in times of hardship.
Yeah. And I think I'm glad you brought this up because nationally and in Connecticut, there's a disproportionate impact on Black and Hispanic communities when it comes to food insecurity. They are feeling it in far greater levels than sort of white neighbors. And a lot of that is to do with really generational policy decisions that were made that have created systems where folks are not able to sort of outrun the policy decisions that were made in the past. It's something, I hope we can, I think acknowledging it is the first step. And I know there's really wonderful people out there who are, far more qualified to speak on the nuances and the details of that and the specifics. And I don't sort of pretend to be the expert on that area. But, we have to be considering the equity implications of every policy decision we're making and recognizing that, much like, we talked about earlier with at the federal level, there's this sort of guiding principle of what eligibility for SNAP is. And then you have a state like Connecticut where it's higher cost of living, you're generally making a little bit more, and you don't sort of align with that federal, like that's a problem. And we have to be considering sort of the equity of our policy decisions when we're making them. And there's a lot that goes into that kind of generational situation, but we could have a whole other hour-long conversation just on that.
Well, kind of on that topic though, in last week, we heard from some SNAP recipients with disabilities. There are concerns that illegal immigrants or other able-bodied individuals or families are using up benefits that are then being denied or reduced for people with disabilities or in similarly vulnerable situations. Have you heard that concern? And what's your view of that perception of the cause for insufficient food assistance? And what, if are the most common causes of waste, fraud, and abuse within the food assistance programs?
So that's not specifically something I have heard directly, though, I know there are a lot of people who are having experiences that I'm not sort of personally aware of. I think that our focus should be on coming together as people who are entitled to these services and uniting in coalition rather than sort of coming against each other and looking for opportunities to align and advocate together, because I think there's real opportunity for us to hold hands and make real positive change for everyone happen. As far as sort of the waste, fraud, and abuse, I think someone who's administering the program is probably best positioned to talk about that. I think talking to someone who has a better sense for the ins and outs of the back end of the program can probably give you a better answer than I could.
Yeah, I know one thing that we did discover in trying to, almost quell those fears and concerns, because sometimes it's really an isolated thing, right? One person, so then you assume that there's another 200,000 people doing it, right? But a lot of the waste, fraud, and abuse come from the lack of security features, for example, on like an EBT card, without having that chip. I know some states started implementing it last year, but if you're swiping your card at a local store and you don't have a chip and you're just scanning it to have card readers, and a lot of that fraudulent activity happen. I want to, give a couple of brief statistics concerning that that we had looked at a couple of days ago. But according to the National Council of Aging, the lack of knowledge and the inability to protect people have left people with EBD cards vulnerable to fraud. And half of the victims don't even know how or where their benefits were stolen. 53% of them became food insecure because of the theft, right? 44% had to borrow money or go into debt based off of a survey that they did amongst 1,700 people. So that's really accounting for it. And I think that from a political standpoint, we just hear too much of a general statement, as we've been talking about. And it's now in our mind that general statement is the actual truth and overall picture. But I'm quite sure in your profession, you're seeing people from all walks of life come in who are dealing with food insecurities.
Yeah, absolutely. It truly is like your neighbors who may be experiencing this. There's no sort of, food insecurity does not discriminate by zip code or street address, or it is something that people are often dealing with very privately, and you may not realize that it's something they're engaging with. And to your point about sort of like stolen benefits and skimming of benefits that folks are entitled to, that is something that the state of Connecticut has done an enormous public push around helping to educate people about how to protect their benefits. It's not something we should have to have, the conversation about. It's awful that it happens. I think the state works very hard to sort of help people know how to protect those benefits, whether it's changing your PIN on a regular basis. Again, that burden shouldn't be on people who are already going through the very burdensome process of getting benefits that they're entitled to. But I give the state of Connecticut a lot of credit for doing their best to be very quick to address cases where that happens, return funds where they're able to, and sort of, make folks whole who are entitled to their benefits, and working on campaigns to help educate people around protecting their SNAP benefits as best they can.
Absolutely. We're very lucky to live in Connecticut. And before we close, I just want to make sure to get your take on the so-called Big Beautiful Bill Act.
Mm-hmm.
How will that affect benefits like SNAP, benefits like your, as provided by your organization, like the Emergency Food Assistance Program, TFAP, that we were talking about earlier, and others?
So I will say TFAP was not included in the reconciliation bill, the Big Beautiful Bill Act, which, I hate to use the word, glad along with any of that, but we were glad to see the TFAP was not included in that. The changes to SNAP are absolutely going to have an effect on us. And more broadly, the changes to Medicaid. If folks are losing their benefits in any way, it has an effect on us, because if people need more assistance, like we said earlier, if they're losing their SNAP benefits, if they're having to choose with whatever income they have between their medication or their doctor's appointments or their health services and eating, they're choosing their health services. It's a choice people shouldn't have to make, but we and our partners are there to provide the food they need if they're ever unfortunately put in that position. So we're sort of working really closely with our partners, state, federal, local. We work really closely with Feeding America to really assess what is the timeline for some of these changes, what are the potential impacts, what are the real implications of it. I'm very partial to making sure we have the right information before we start sort of putting programming or responses in place. So we're trying to really get our arms around what is this actually going to look like on the ground, and looking at the ways we can sort of build resilience in the face of some of these changes, because the people we serve are going to feel the effect of it, and in turn, so will we. I'm more concerned about them than I am about us, frankly, because we're committed to serving no matter what. But I suspect we will see increased need as a result of some of these changes.
If I recall correctly, the timeline of the implementation of this may vary from state to state, depending on how proactive they want to implement certain cuts, ahead of whatever the deadline is, for things like reassessing work requirements. For SNAP, I heard from one report that some states are considering doing that early, as opposed to waiting to the last minute. Where is the best place to get information about how these changes may affect food programs? Is that from your local food pantry, or another central source?
Yeah, I know for some people, talking to the folks at their local food pantry may be the space that they're most comfortable. There's a real trusted relationship there, and we're going to be working to make sure that all of those local food pantries we work with have the information they need to either guide someone to another individual who can get them that information, or that they have the information themselves. So we're in an info gathering phase ourselves, trying to get the word out and make sure we're giving people accurate information. I never want to provide things that are wrong if I can avoid it. I would say continue to look at the DSS website, the Department of Social Services. They're keeping sort of a running page going on sort of what the status is on certain things. They're doing a great job trying to keep people informed. The Department of Social Services oversees the SNAP program, so they're going to be the folks who are sharing that information, and they administer it. So they are the ones at the end of the day who have sort of the most up-to-date knowledge on what's going on and what's happening there. And they're also the folks who can help get you signed up for SNAP if you're eligible. And I would say the same goes for the Department of Public Health and, other state agencies. We're trying to work really hard in coalition to get accurate shared information out to the community so that we're sort of all speaking with one voice, to not create any sort of noise that doesn't need to be there. We want to make sure we're getting people really clear, accurate information at a time when, people are feeling scared and uncertain. And if we can provide any amount of clear, concise information that provides even a modicum of certainty, that's what we want to do.
Yeah, I was going to add that the DSS, they're going to be launching that sometime in August, early August, I believe. I spoke with someone from their office regarding just their rollout to inform the public of those changes that are coming down from the federal government. This has been an excellent conversation. I think that taking things into consideration, the work that Jenny and others are doing is intangible. Like, you can't put a price on that. And people who are looking for ways to supplement their food, there is a method and organizations partnering with other community involvement. You're able to get the nutrition that you need. And ultimately, that is the goal. I think this conversation is far from over. But one thing that I do want to close in saying was, I took this quote from someone on your website, and I thought it just summed up your job and everything that you guys do. The person said, "We are glad you see us. I need healthy food options more now than ever. Someone is listening to the needs of this community, most vulnerable. Thank you." And so we say thank you to you, Jenny, for joining us and continuing the work that you do.
Thank you so much. It was truly a pleasure talking with you about all of this, and thank you for sort of everything you're doing to advocate for your friends and your neighbors and your community, and giving us the chance to speak about this important issue. I really appreciate it.
Indeed.
Thank you, Jenny. Pleasure having you. So for everyone listening, stay tuned in and sign up for the More Than Walking newsletter at morethanwalking.com to learn about the topic we will cover next and how you can participate. Also, like, comment, and subscribe to our More Than Walking YouTube channel to watch each podcast, and click that notification bell so you are alerted when new episodes drop. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search for More Than Walking or Super Adaptables. And of course, check out Feeding America and the Connecticut Food Share websites. And you could also reach out to spinalpedia.com and request peer mentoring. We are partnered with them to provide one-on-one navigation of all the different social safety net programs to help walk you through it. And of course, reach out to your local food bank or food pantry for more information about things near you.
Indeed. Until then, remain encouraged, stay hopeful, and above all else,
keep adapting.